about like your journey of how you got into the whole like lab on a chip type stuff, and also obviously like testing like blood work, and I'm a bit of a biohacker myself. Obviously, like it's like really important for health, so the problem is clear. But how did you like learn about all the ways to, just all the science behind it in terms of all the ways to like approach this? And then how did you settle on like photonics and this like lab on a chip type stuff as like the most promising like vector to go into it in? And like you didn't have a background in this in like undergraduate, and so how did you teach yourself, as well as I saw you got into like a research position without like having a PhD, so would love to like learn about that, especially for in like Southeast Asia, right? Like the research institutions probably aren't as strong, so I think the need to almost like self-study is like a lot more than if you're like based in the States at like a good college, etc.
Okay, it's like three questions. So I think so I studied chemistry in my undergrad. So it's wasn't that far off actually from blood testing in that sense. But so it's a good base for that type of thing, and also for materials. But it's I mean, I think so you were kind of asking this earlier, like how did you end up doing this deep tech startup and bypassing the PhD and so on. So I made attempts at doing grad school. So it's not, and I actually don't think that self-study is effective. Like, so it's effective to a degree. I mean, the thing that works the best of all studying is tutoring. So one-on-one direct apprenticeships are like the most effective. Apprenticeship or tutoring is by far the most effective way to learn. And if you look at, maybe I should go outside because there's somebody's cutting grass. 1 second. Let me just sit down.
Looks like a nice day where you're at.
Yeah. 1 second. Oh. Yeah, so basically one-on-one tutoring or apprenticeships are by far like the most effective ways of learning, like versus, let's say, sitting in a classroom or reading textbooks or watching like YouTube videos or whatever. Because if you misunderstand something or you make a mistake or whatever, the person can directly correct you, right? So they're actually like you're in a feedback loop, right? Whereas if you're reading a textbook, there's no feedback loop. Like if you misunderstand the textbook, you might find out about it like a year later. So, however, you can't, I mean, like Alexander the Great had like a tutor, Aristotle was his tutor, right? So it's like, ideally that's better than reading Aristotle, probably. I mean, it might have both benefits, but it's, you're not going to have a tutor for like every subject, probably, or not somebody who's amazing. So I think it's just a mix of, in the end, like your PhD is, so I spent some time in grad school or like doing research in universities, both at like Technion and MIT. And in the end, a lot of the grad school value is the people around you teaching you things, right? And the structure of like having the structure there of like, the resources and everything. So sitting at home with a textbook is very helpful for getting the background information, but I think you can't get to the edge of a field reading textbooks. Like it's extremely difficult, especially because textbooks don't necessarily contain all the information. Like some of the information is just inside people. And so it's like, and on the other hand, like it might be that the people around you don't contain all the information and some of it is inside textbooks. So it's really a combination. I mean, there's incredible resources online now. So it's not like, you don't need to go to a school or to a PhD program or whatever for somebody to give you a lecture about, basic topics. Like you can just go online and watch the MIT lectures or like whatever. But it's, there are many things that are not included in that lecture that require like actual physical presence and feedback loops. So I'm not against, like, even though I personally did not finish a PhD yet, maybe I'll still do it. But I'm not against, I think if you're an entrepreneur type person, it's difficult to fit. Maybe it was like difficult for me to fit a full PhD in because I did a startup out of undergrad, and that took 5-6 years, and then I went back to grad school, and I was by then older, and I didn't want to just do any PhD, right? So I wanted to like find a field that I was interested in. So it took me a couple of years of doing research and just taking classes and things like that to search around for a field I was interested in. And I found Silicon Photonics, which was like super exciting, and I got into Silicon Photonics at the time. Nothing related to blood testing, and as I was working in it, I was considering doing a PhD or whatever. But then when COVID started, it just made a lot more sense to be in a startup than be in academia, because like MIT was really fun before COVID. Like that's when I was there. But during COVID, like universities, all the value, of like being around people, the talks, this and that, like kind of diminished. So being in a startup was much better because it's like a small group of people. And the company that I'm at now, SiPhox, I started with a friend of mine who was, probably 10 or 15 years ahead of me in Silicon Photonics. So he's like an expert that spent his whole career in it. So for me, it was like ideal because I was learning directly from him. So it's like, I wish I could say like, yeah, just get a textbook, there's that. I mean, you have to get the textbook, like that's obvious, read the textbook, but it's not, the real value is in finding the couple of people that are really good in the area and learning from them directly. Like that's much better than any
No,
textbook, for sure.
I don't imagine that one would be able to like learn everything at home. I guess my thought process was more instead of going the traditional undergraduate, graduate school, etc. 10-year process, like just go look at like be like, okay, let's pick a fruitful field that I'm interested or passionate about, and then study like 50 companies that have been funded recently that are commercializing this technology, then like backtrack and be like, okay, let's read like the top 10 research papers, etc., from journals, review articles. I don't know, maybe like search up on ChatGPT if I don't understand, and then from there then be like, okay, well, who are the top minds and the top researchers field, and then like reach out to them, and I don't know, maybe pay them for mentorship, or I don't know, just be nice to them. They help you,
I think
and then build a team from there.
One of the things that really is valuable is if you can work for free. So most people don't want to work for free or for no reward, like there's no credit, no degree, and no money, right? So very few people are willing to do that. So if you're willing to essentially work for free, sometimes you'll get paid anyway because it's like difficult for them to accept a free labor. But if you're willing to work for free, you can work almost anywhere. Like it's much easier to get into a organization or get somebody to let you work for them if you're not motivated by like basic stuff. If you just want to learn, right, or you just want to participate in the project, it's much easier. Like if you look at like anybody doing something ambitious, I don't know, if you're interested in brain computer interfaces and you really want to work at a lab that's doing brain computer interfaces, if you just show up and really like you're knowledgeable already, like let's say you've read a textbook about it and you're like, this is like what I want to do and I will do it for no money, the chances that somebody will let you do it is pretty high. So I think that separates you from the average person. So I was able to do that because out of my undergrad, I did a startup and I had some savings from selling it and so on. So basically, I don't think you need that much money to do that. It's like, distance levels for a couple of years allows you to, that's like very powerful compared to being a person who's like going from job to job. And it's like, okay, what are the benefits? This, that, like, that's a much more, or like, am I going to get something out of this? Like some paper or whatever. It separates you a lot from people like that. And I think there are not that many competitors in that field. So in the field of like trying to get a PhD at Harvard, there's like everybody wants a PhD from Harvard. But in the field of like, I want to work for like the best person in brain computer interfaces for free, that's like maybe a couple people have asked for that, right? Like in the whole world from that person. So it's not like you're not like competing in the mainstream like rat race at that point. So that's another piece of advice that's like more practical, is if you can find a way to work for free, then it opens up a lot of things, at least for a short time, like even like 6 months or something.
That's awesome. I'll definitely keep that in mind, especially like when I Or maybe when my kids are 1 or 2 years older than they are now, I'll go make the trek over to Cambridge and just hang around campus and
Yeah,
see
yeah,
like which researchers will be nice enough to to hang out. Um, so yeah, would love to learn more about like your journey for like how did you come about like choosing like Silicon Photonics and what was that like exploration process like before you settled on it? And then in
yeah,
terms of like, working for free, did that come like after you selected the area, or was that like part of the process?
yeah. So it was. So what happened after I left? My first startup was acquired. I left after 2 years, so I was working at the acquirer for 2 years and like building factories. And so I was like pretty burnt out from that and left and was just studying and like just hanging out and like living on the beach and studying. And at that time, it was like 2017, early 2017. It was like so there was the 2014 like Bitcoin peak, and then there was one in 2017, like that started like it started going up in 2017. So at that time, I actually had the free time to like look into it. So I learned about how the internal workings, like the mining, the cryptography behind mining, and I thought it was like super interesting. It is actually, if you don't know how it works, like, and if you just watch like a 20-minute video, it's incredible. It's a very, very interesting innovation that like nobody expected to work and stuff like that. The rest of cryptocurrency is not as interesting. It's basically the rest of it is like just financial system stuff. But when I learned that, I thought that the like a big problem with that was that it would use a lot of energy. So that's like a common discussion, like it uses a lot of energy. And I was just thinking about like how to solve that. And I thought that I thought of this like kind of crazy idea. I mean, it's a little bit hard to tell if it's a good idea now in retrospect. I ended up publishing a lot about it, and it's actually it got commercialized by some people and so on. But it's still I don't know, like it might take a long time to know if it's a good idea. But basically, it was like to use optical computing instead of electronic computing, and there's some like energy benefits and so on. And so through that, I was searching for like a way to prototype an optical computer, and and look, at the time, it was if you were doing something in cryptocurrency, you could really make money with it quite easily if you were like a competent person, because people were essentially launching. This was like the first wave of like fake cryptocurrency, or maybe it wasn't the first wave. The first wave that I was paying attention to, and you could launch a coin that's like the property coin, and it's like we do something with real estate or whatever. So if you're like just an entrepreneur, you could kind of print money that way. But my goal was not that. My goal was to go back to like learning things, right? Because I had been working for 5 or 6 years in a startup and didn't have a lot of like time to do deep work. And so I chose like I was interested in Bitcoin and I saw that there's something exciting happening there, but I chose like the most nerdy thing I could do related to it because I wanted to like through this learn something technical. And so I was working on like optical computing, how to like build an optical computer for this type of cryptography, and that led me to like talking to a lot of interesting people. One of them recommended Silicon Photonics, so he sent me some papers. I read the papers. I was like, holy shit, I didn't even know Silicon Photonics existed. So, which is Silicon Photonics in and of itself is like a Bitcoin type thing in the sense that it's like some very big innovation that, I think at the time when I learned about it was still pretty niche. So it's basically people figured out how to do commercial, really high quality optics using silicon with the same fab type, the same fab processes almost as as normal, transistors. And so that was very exciting to find out because I didn't even know that was possible. So when I found out, I took like more classes in silicon photonics. I went to like various whatever I could get my hands on, like textbooks and so on. And eventually, I learned more about it, learned to design the chips, not to a high degree, but like I could do it, and that's how I got into it. But it was originally through this interest in Bitcoin mining. So it
How did
wasn't
you?
like I was like, oh, I need to find the best thing in the world. I was just kind of following like interesting topics.
What was that process for learning it? So it was you read the papers, and then what was it like how
Um,
like was
I
it textbooks
Yeah,
plus
I mean,
get
I
to
looked
learn
up.
I could
There was
design
some. Yeah, there's a class. So I did multiple things. So there were I emailed people and like got them, just got them on the phone and asked questions. I purchased textbooks. I took a class. The class was extremely helpful. So this maybe also is like pivotal, is like if there is a class, it can help a lot. So there's like a really good Silicon Photonics class on EDX from University of British Columbia. So I took that class, did the project in the class is designing a chip. So I designed the chip, they fabricated it. The professor is like really into teaching this, and he wrote his own textbook and everything. So I took that class, and that helped me get like the fundamentals. And then I was able to learn a lot from people, like individual people, because I already had the fundamentals. So that was very helpful. I think just time also, like if you just spend, if you're patient, if you spent a couple of years in a field, you're just going to, go to the conferences, like do stuff like that. And if you're a smart person who learns, like who's able to absorb a lot, you'll eventually learn. Because I mean, some of these deep tech topics, there are no classes like outright, there's no undergrad class necessarily anyway. So it's not that you are missing anything by not having done it in your undergrad. Yeah.
When you were, so if we go back a step earlier, like when you were on the beach just like studying, how did you go about that? Was it more like journals and or like your scientific literature, or was it like just
No.
people doing
No. Like it was like my degenerate friends were like making money on Bitcoin, and I was curious how it worked. So I just started reading. I read the Bitcoin white paper and read like, watched some YouTube videos about how mining worked. Like it was not like doing
how
a
would you
literature
make the jump to like
literature.
optical computing there? Because
It
that
took a
would
long
be
time.
pretty,
It took a
pretty
long
like
time. Like I had to grok how mining worked. Then it took some time for me to realize that like, oh, Bitcoin's very small. So if it was like much larger than it is today, at the time it was quite small. It would use like a few percent of the world's energy, maybe like 5 or 10% of the world's energy at the maximum size. And I was like, oh, is that good? And so then over time, I think originally I had the idea of like using some type of like quantum computer or something. So I was like reading about, is it possible to have like one or a small number of very expensive computers that don't use much energy? And then the idea evolved. I think I got the idea to use optical computing from, there's a paper on doing optical cryptography from a guy. It's like a thesis, MIT thesis from, I used to know the name by heart, but it's basically one-way optical functions. So he would make like these credit cards or whatever, which had like a optical pattern in them, like a crystal with some grains. And when you shine a light through it, it makes like a very unique barcode. So that's a little bit similar to what they do in Bitcoin. So there are some overlap with the type of cryptography. Like Bitcoin uses a one-way function also.
yeah.
So basically, I think I read that thesis, and that then I was like, oh, maybe
What
this.
led you onto that thesis?
I could not tell you. I have no idea. I don't remember. But Google or something.
I guess maybe if I rephrase the question, I guess what I'm trying to like figure out is like how best to answer like like the Hamming question, which is like what are the like most important problems or highest impact problems like in a particular field, and then yeah, like how you would like go about like learning them, because I guess for I don't know, like a passionately curious like layman like myself, I'd like go to I don't know nature, or I'll go to like any of
No,
the
but that's very
like,
difficult. That's
like,
very
there's so much
difficult
stuff.
because
Where
if
do I
you read
start?
a nature
Millions.
paper, that's very difficult because there's political reasons to write nature papers. So like people write nature papers to advance their career. So if you just as a novice, you read a nature paper in a topic that you don't know anything about, you're just as likely to come out with the wrong understanding as the right one, because it's the nature paper author is like making a political statement when they write it typically. So like that, let's say the political statement could be like, this technology that I work on is really good, right? And so it's very rare that you have like an impartial nature paper. Like even a review paper is written by somebody who has a stake. Like very often they have a particular technology that they like, and they're writing a review paper about all the options, but their option is like the one they like. So it's very rare to find. I mean, really good review papers are very rare. And like if you find a good one, it's like gold, right? But that's almost like a textbook, right? Like a good textbook. Textbooks are typically less, although sometimes textbooks are also biased towards like whatever the author works on. But textbooks, like really good textbooks that people have been using for decades, are typically more impartial and like really teaching you about the field. I think if you directly talk to people, you can they'll be more open about the problems, because like if you write a Nature paper, you have to get published. So you're not always like you're hiding the problems in the supplementary, or you just don't mention them, or like it's implied, like everybody in the field knows, like, oh, this graphene is amazing, except like it takes 10 hours to make one piece of it or something. And like a grad student has to sit and make it by, like in a microscope, like searching for this graphene. And it's like one transistor was made in a 6 months and nobody has any idea how to like make 10. And so whatever, I don't know the state of graphene transistors. I'm just like, I do know that people do that, like with like twisted bilayer graphene. There's a lot of manual like selection of these pieces of graphene, and so I don't know to what extent, like if you read the Nature paper, you're going to get that out of it if you're a novice. So it's risky to like, you can get super excited about something. I mean, that happened to me. I was very excited about optical computing and silicon photonics because there was a paper called Deep Learning with Coherent Photonics or Coherent Nanophotonics or something. And that paper launched like 2 startups. It was like Light Matter and Light Intelligence. And I thought like, oh, wow, like people are building optical computing. This is like very promising. And I was working on similar stuff. But when I got to know more, like a few years into that, I learned that actually like that paper didn't solve any of the like real serious problems. It was like some cool demonstrations and ideas, but it didn't solve the problems that would like really help them compete with GPUs. So all of those problems they have to like solve within their startup. The paper kind of left them open. And I couldn't have known that just reading it as a layman. Like it's impossible. So anyway,
how would you assess the the viability or the commercial, like the commercial like viability of a particular like technology, to say like for like silicon photonics, when you first heard about it, how did you assess that? Oh, I feel like this is really promising, especially if because you mentioned the interest in like diagnostics like came after. Like what gave you the confidence to be like, okay, I want to spend the next like 5 years or to deep dive on this, and so you double down with like your time, and as well as like how did you relate it to diagnostics and the problem space after?
The diagnostics came much later, but it's I mean, you want to take steps that you understand, right? So you want to go in steps of things that you understand from first principles, ideally. So like, and also you can't be trying to start a startup. Like if you want to do something in deep tech and you're trying to start a startup, like that's probably already wrong. So you probably first want to just work on interesting things, because the chances of you finding something that's worthy of a startup are not that high. So it's like, if you're dead set on starting a startup, you're going to start a startup with like a very, maybe with a very weak idea or a weak area, like something you poorly understand, and you misunderstand the potential of it or something. But with silicon photonics, I think it's a good example. Like I wasn't that sure of the potential of it. Initially, I was just interested in it intellectually. And then as I learned more about it, I was like, wow, this is very powerful. And it's still very early. And what do I mean by early? Like I was able to learn a good amount about designing these chips like in 3 months, which is not true for electronic chips. Are extremely complicated and very advanced, but like in photonics, there are like a couple of components available. And they're like very simple, it's just like a waveguide that splits the light or whatever. Like it's so early that it was still not. The problem is like fields that have been solved for a long time, they're already so complicated that like to really compete in them, you need like a really long time to get into it. But fields that are relatively new, I mean, I think generative AI is probably like this, right? Where there are no like 20-year experts, or like very few. There might be a couple of people who are like super early in this, but most people are just learning it now. So there are not that many. It's not that to get to the edge of it is not as hard. So I think with silicon photonics that was true. That it was a very powerful technology that had just started working. So the internet was like starting to run on these chips the last like couple of years when I discovered it. no, like 2010, they weren't fully commercial, and then by 2015 it was already scaled up. So I think being at the point where something is working, but it's not yet so advanced that it's, you really have to be like a 10-year expert to contribute to it, I think is useful, and you can judge that based on your experience with it. So like how quickly can you get to the point of like thinking of things that nobody's thought of, like thinking of applications that no one's thought of, that when you tell that application to someone who's an expert, they're not like, oh yeah, like this was 30 years ago, somebody tried this, so it's kind of, you have to do it on a case-to-case basis. I think also typically you want to be looking at, if you're really like trying to be strategic, which is very hard to do, you have to look at like what's the forcing function, like why hasn't this been done before, why now, kind of like VC type questions, like why now, and why me, and stuff like that, are useful questions.
Yeah, yeah. Um, would you know, like, I guess just off the top of your head, what would you say are like some like very promising industries that have those characteristics, and would there be a process that you would recommend to spot industries like this? Obviously, like LLMs is like all over the news, so
Yeah.
everybody knows that. But something like Silicon Photonics, how do you find something like that where it's like, okay, this is just taking off, and within 3 months you can get to like the edge of like knowledge, and really sort of be an
Yeah.
expert?
Well, no, I didn't get to the edge of knowledge in 3 months. It's just I got to the point of like even being in the conversation, which I think is harder
Yeah.
to do in some fields. So I think, um, I mean, this is like very, again, the way to find this is to actually have the free time and leisure to dig into things, right? So right now I'm like, like this, working on a very narrow thing in startup, like, but I I mean, I think nuclear power, there are some reasons why that might be a good time. It might be something interesting right now because politically, it's mostly was like politically gated, and now people are maybe more open to allowing nuclear power to be built. So if I was doing nothing and had no prior like bias, maybe I would be looking into that. Yeah, like that's one. Um, Yeah, it's always a good time to be doing something with bio because bio is like the unsolved science, right? So the other sciences are more solved. Like chemistry is more solved than biology. So working with something that involves biology always like means there's more opportunity in a way. Because just the tools, like 50 years ago, the tools were really bad. Even 10 years ago, they were worse than they are now. So things are always like becoming more possible in biology, just generally. Um, Yeah, I would say maybe those two. Um, well, yeah, so I'm happy I could help in a small way, and let me know if there's anything else I can do. I'm happy to help. It sounds good.
Sorry, I
Uh,
know we're way over time, but yeah,
yeah.
if you have like a couple more minutes, how did you like get into the blood testing stuff as the application?
Um, it just turns out like when we were first starting the company, we had some ideas about how to make like more complicated silicon photonics systems. Those ideas were mostly Dietrich's because he's an expert in the field. And I've been working in it for 15 years at that point or whatever. Like from before it was commercial, basically. Um, and we were just whiteboarding all the options of what to do with it. And one of the ones that came up was like biosensing, and I knew more. Like physicists typically don't know anything about biology, but I was coming from chemistry and knew a lot more about biology. So I knew just enough to kind of, we were able to entertain the idea, and I was able to like call people and talk to them and kind of get a feel for whether there was something there. Um, and I think it's still, it remains to be proven that there's something there because we're not a billion-dollar company, right? But I think it turned out that basically the big thing is that if you want a VC fundable business, you have to have an enormous market. And bio can be an enormous market because like there are so many humans. Whereas a lot of other markets for optics are pretty small. So it's more like a good business, but it's hard to get VC funding. So one of the things that pushed us in the direction of doing bio in general is that first of all bio tools, like almost all the tools contain optics. Like if you open up a lab tool, it's like full of large, the standard optical components. So that's always like a good opportunity to make a chip. But it's like especially consumer diagnostics is like a 7 billion person market, right? So it's or whatever, 1 billion person market, let's say, if you're doing something premium. So it's that's probably part of the reason we went into it, is that we knew this is one of the things we could do with the technology, and it also fit the shape of a VC fundable startup. Which isn't, of course, the best way to choose something. Like the best way would be to like choose the technology afterwards, in theory. But I think with deep tech, that's not always true. Because let's say if you find a use case that you really like, but you don't know the technology to do it, and then you're in search of the technology, you might end up, you might not know the technology very deeply, so it looks like you could do it, but maybe it can't. And so it's not, I think it's harder, like in software, you want to know the problem before you have the solution. You don't want to have a solution and search for the problem, right? But I think in deep tech, it's more complicated because you might not, unless you really understand something deeply, you might not be able to like fit it to a problem, right? So anyway, that's how we ended up working on this. Yeah. Anyway, if you have more things you need from me, you can ask, and maybe I can help. It's a cool project. I also angel invest. So if you guys produce some interesting companies, I could invest in them potentially. If it's like something I understand, then I've been doing that like for a few years. It's kind of, I'm not sure if it's charity or financial, because I haven't seen yet whether there are returns. But
yeah, I'm not sure either from like my investments. I think it's more charity, but yeah.
You find out later, I guess.
Yeah. No, thank you so much, Michael. Really appreciate the advice. If I'm ever in town up your way in Boston, I'll come say hi. But yeah, no, thank you so much.
Sure.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Michael.
Cheers. Yeah.
Take care, buddy.
Have a nice one.
Cheers, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.